Elizabeth Kelly directs the Electromagnetic Safety Alliance in Arizona. She manages the International EMF Scientist Appeal to the United Nations. She has a master's degree in healthcare administration and worked as an analyst at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Kelly, and I am the director of the International EMF Scientist Appeal. This appeal is signed by scientists all over the world who have published peer-reviewed papers in professional journals and have found biological and health effects far below the safety limits set by international standard-setting organizations and the FCC. The scientists call for precautionary measures to protect humankind and nature. This appeal is advised by Dr. Annie Sasko, former unit chief with the International Agency on Research on Cancer and retired director of the French NIH, INSERM. Dr. Magda Habas, professor emeritus at Trent University in Canada. Dr. Henry Lai, professor emeritus at the University of Washington in the USA. Dr. Ronald Melnick, who is a former chief scientist at the U.S. National Toxicology Program in the USA. Dr. Joel Moskowitz at the University of California School of Public Health in the USA. And finally, Dr. Martin Blank from Columbia University, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. We are honoring Dr. Blank at this conference because of his passionate commitment and concern for the health of the people, and by the way he illuminated the subject matter so that it would bring people to understand how electromagnetic fields can heal as well as harm. I would like to show you a video that features Dr. Martin Blank, which he made in 2015, and we used it to promote the International EMF Scientist Appeal. It only takes about 3 minutes, so I'm going to show it to you right now.
I'm here with disturbing news about our favorite gadgets, cell phones, tablets, Wi-Fi, etc. Putting it bluntly, they are damaging the living cells in our bodies and killing many of us prematurely. I'm Dr. Martin Blank from the Department of Physiology and Cellular Biophysics at Columbia University. It is distressing for me and more than 160 colleagues who today are petitioning the United Nations requesting that they address this problem. We are scientists and engineers, and I am here to tell you we have created something that is harming us, and it is getting out of control. Before Edison's light bulb, there was very little electromagnetic radiation in our environment. The levels today are very many times higher than natural background levels and are growing rapidly because of all the new devices that emit this radiation. An example that a lot of us have in our pockets right now is the cell phone. One study shows that as cell phone usage has spread widely, the incidence of fatal brain cancer in younger people has more than tripled. We are putting cellular antennas on residential buildings and on top of hospitals where people are trying to get well. Wireless utility meters and cell towers are blanketing our neighborhoods with radiation. It's particularly frightening that radiation from our telecommunication and power line technology is damaging the DNA in our cells. It is clear to many biologists that this can account for the rising cancer rates. Future generations, our children, are at risk. These biologists and scientists are not being heard on the committees that set safety standards. The biological facts are being ignored, and as a result, the safety limits are much too high. They are not protective. More protection will probably result from full disclosure of possible conflicts of interest between regulators and industry. Rising exposure to electromagnetic radiation is a global problem. The World Health Organization and international standard-setting bodies are not acting to protect the public's health and well-being. International exposure guidelines for electromagnetic fields must be strengthened to reflect the reality of their impact on our bodies and, in particular, on our DNA. Although we are still in the midst of a great technological transformation, the time to deal with the harmful biological and health effects is long overdue. We are really all part of a large biological experiment without our informed consent. To protect our children, ourselves, and our ecosystem, we must reduce exposure by establishing more protective guidelines. And so today, scientists from around the world are submitting an appeal to the United Nations, its member states, and the World Health Organization to provide leadership in dealing with this emerging public health crisis.
As of today, there are 255 EMF scientists from 44 nations who have signed this appeal. And there are an additional 15 supporting scientists who have published in related fields and do EMF education who also signed the appeal. And the appeal has been published in 17 different languages. The scientists call for greater protection for humankind and nature. They have serious concerns regarding the ubiquitous and increasing hazard from electrical and wireless devices and infrastructure. The EMF safety guidelines set by international standard-setting organizations and the FCC are inadequate and obsolete when it comes to long-term, low-intensity exposures common today. And there are numerous scientific publications that you've been hearing about at this conference which show that EMF affects living organisms at levels well below most other standards. Damage goes well beyond the human race, as there is growing evidence of harmful effects to both plant and animal life. And the scientific basis for the scientists' concerns include increased cancer risk, cellular stress, increase in harmful free radicals, genetic damages, structural and functional changes of the reproductive system, learning and memory deficits, neurological disorders, and negative impacts on general well-being in humans. Had this appeal been written today, it would have taken into account the two major long-term animal studies that were published in 2018, which found clear evidence of harm, of cancer. And also, had this appeal been written today, the scientists would probably argue for a higher classification by IARC, which currently says radiofrequency radiation is potentially carcinogenic. They believe now that that classification should be upgraded to probable or even group 1A human carcinogen. We urgently call for action by international agencies and national governments. We call for the UN to exert leadership in fostering the development of protective EMF guidelines by encouraging the adoption of precautionary measures and by educating the public about health risks, particularly on behalf of children in fetal development. We call upon the UN Environment Program to convene an independent multidisciplinary committee to explore alternatives to current practices and to recommend precautionary measures that could substantially lower human exposures to radio frequency and extremely low frequency. By not taking action, the World Health Organization is failing to fulfill its role as the preeminent international public health agency. Collectively, the scientists request that children and pregnant women be protected, that guidelines and regulatory standards be strengthened, that manufacturers be encouraged to develop safer technology, that utilities responsible for the generation, transmission, distribution, and monitoring of electricity maintain adequate power quality and ensure proper electrical wiring to minimize harmful ground currents, that the public be informed about the potential health risks from electromagnetic energy and taught harm reduction strategies, that medical professionals be educated about the biological effects of electromagnetic energy and be provided training on treatment of patients with electromagnetic sensitivity. That is the purpose of this conference. That government fund training and research on electromagnetic fields and health that is independent from industry, and that they mandate industry to cooperate with researchers. That the media disclose experts' financial relationships with industry when citing their opinions regarding health and safety aspects of EMF emitting technologies. And finally, that there be created safe zones, low or no EMF radiation zones. Now I'm going to show you the names and the affiliations and the nations of the 255 scientists who have thus far signed this appeal. I'm going to slowly scroll through this list so you can see, but you can go on our website, emfscientist.org, and review it for yourself. And these scientists have a number of different occupations, and they are usually with universities or research institutes or government agencies. They all signed out of their overriding concern that the world needs to know about their studies and the effects they've seen through their research. They also were signing this appeal because they're being ignored, and they know it. And with the proliferation of artificial EMF in the atmosphere and on the surface of the earth, it is time to take action by speaking up. And that's what these scientists are doing. Now, not everybody who signed this list. We had heard from a number of scientists who were unable to sign. Why? Because they're young, they're raising a family, they're engaged in important research, and they don't want to lose their funding. They fear being retaliated against. They work for the industry, but they're concerned. So I assure you, this list would be a lot longer otherwise. But the fact that it has so many names, and we continue to add names, says quite a bit. And if you are interested in signing this appeal and you're qualified to do so, we'd love to hear from you. We have a slide coming up that tells you who to contact. And when you do so, send us a citation or an abstract. Now we're almost through this list. I will hurry up and finish it so we can continue with our presentation. If you have published a paper on electromagnetic fields or in a related area, you're welcome to contact us. Contact us at info@emfscientist.org, and please send relevant citations or abstracts. So here we are in 2021. The evidence of harm is undeniable. It's like a forest bending in the wind. There have now been 9 decades of major government publications, including from the U.S. Office of Naval Research, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, NASA, and by Russia. And there's limited published research on 5G. You know, there has been no safety testing on 5G. The EMF portal, which you can find at emfportal.de, contains over 30,000 EMF papers, and of them there are 210 5G papers, but they are technical mainly, except for 2. But even those 2 studies are not relevant because they did not test the EMF signals for bioeffects or health effects. So what began in 1965 with EMF exposure standards set for military and industrial purposes continues to this day to support commercial applications in homes, schools, and workplaces, and the public is not protected. One does not bite the hand that feeds. The United Nations remains unresponsive. The International Agency on Research on Cancer did act to schedule an independent scientific review of radiofrequency carcinogenicity as early as 2023. The IARC might stop conducting independent scientific reviews of agents and substances, though. We're very concerned about this. The World Health Organization promotes harmonization with the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection's radiofrequency guidelines, while having adopted the IARC classification of radiofrequency radiation as possibly carcinogenic to humans in 2011. That doesn't make sense. And finally, the World Health Organization's environmental health criteria are being developed with a lack of transparency. Impartial scientists who have published EMF papers have applied to serve on these committees and have not been invited. As is true always, public policy lags behind science and technology, and that's true today. In the United States, the National Toxicology Program cell phone radiation report found clear evidence of cancer and other adverse health effects. However, the Food and Drug Administration has no plans to conduct a quantitative health risk assessment to look at these findings for human health implications. And the FDA now criticizes the National Toxicology Program report for not confirming the health implications. Well, that's not their job. The job belongs to the FDA, and they should do it. The FCC is not planning to revise its radiofrequency human exposure standards in a way that incorporates 5G safely. They're just continuing with their current level assuming that these signal characteristics and power levels are the same. Well, they're not. This infrastructure is entirely different. We need safety testing. And federal and state policies have been accelerating the rapid development of 5G all over the country with no prior safety testing and no monitoring. U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal has stated, "So we are flying blind here when it comes to health and safety." So I'd just like to tell you that I believe that doctors can make a big difference in affecting policy to protect your patients and all of us. These actions start with your patients. And I encourage you to take what you've learned, the knowledge and skills you've learned from this conference, and apply them to your own behavior and as you treat your patients. Because these patients are not going to heal. If they're being affected by electromagnetic fields and other environmental toxins, you can serve as a role model. You can advise them on what precautions they can take at home and in their workplace to protect themselves and their family. And there's so many things you can do to influence your patients and affect their health outcomes. Scientists, engineers, and medical doctors need to join with citizens to speak up about this. It's very important to influence policy, and you can start where you are. There are groups all over the country working on this issue, all over the world, in fact, and many of them have been at this conference. So look into it. Talk to one another. See what you can do, because if we stand together, we're going to make a difference on this. In closing, I would like to tell you that the EMF scientists are working together. They've formed an international commission on the biological effects of electromagnetic fields. This organization will facilitate collaborations among international scientists dedicated to ensuring the protection of humans and other species from potentially harmful effects of non-ionizing radiation. They will issue safety guidelines for public and occupationally exposed workers from exposure to electrical, magnetic, and electromagnetic fields in frequencies ranging from between 0 to 300 gigahertz. And finally, they will make recommendations based on the best peer-reviewed scientific research publications that include and go beyond establishing numerical exposure standards. Thank you for your attention.